My name is John H., and I'm an alcoholic. I'm also a drug addict and a compulsive gambler. In this Code Blue Big Book Study in Action seminar, we're going to go through the recovery section of the Big Book line by line, and we're going to do the action that our book tells us we must do to recover from the seemingly hopeless condition of mind and body. This is based on the Canadian method used by the Golden Slippers, but I also borrow a lot of information from the Joe and Charlie Big Book Weekend tapes, as I feel their interpretation carries so much depth and weight. Sometimes I use their material verbatim, so don't get angry at me. Sometimes they can say things a lot better than me. This action and study is designed so that you can follow along in a 4th edition Big Book. Have your pen and highlighter ready. I don't claim to be any kind of big book guru or top 10 spiritualist. I'm just a simple drunk who was almost dead from the disease when a group of my heroes, some recovered alcoholics, took me through the book 5 years ago and saved my life. There's also some paperwork that you can download. Hopefully I'll get that online as well. Some from Joe and Charlie and some from the Golden Slippers. Please forgive any mistakes, errors, or misquotes you may detect. I'm sure there are many, for once again, I'm just a simple drunk trying to help other folks as I was helped myself. Thanks for listening. All right, well, hopefully some people will show up, but I'm going to start. I'm John. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, John.
During the 1950s, a man by the name of Max C., now deceased, started a group in Winnipeg, Manitoba called the Golden Slippers. The group was a back to the basics of the Big Book kind of group, especially for those people who could not stay sober for any length of time. The group took a bunch of chronic slippers and walked them through the steps, taking the action exactly as laid out by the first 100 men and women who wrote the basic textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not your typical thanks for sharing kind of AE meeting, nor is it like any seminar. Participants are asked to do all 12 steps as laid out in our basic textbook. One or more of the people who have done this work before will be guides to lead you through the instructions using a dictionary published at about the same time as the book Alcoholics Anonymous to help us better understand the directions as they were written by the first 100 men and women. We ask every participant to commit to the entire process. Though we read and study the AA Big Book, this group is not limited to members of AA. We who have participated in these groups before have come to understand that these sessions make us much better sponsors. We can now lead people through the steps exactly as given to us by those who have gone before, unfettered and unchanged. In addition to being a boot camp for sponsors, we also feel this is especially valuable to those who've been through some sort of treatment or rehab and have been, in effect, left off at step 3 or step 5. Recovery requires that we do all 12 steps. We recover in AA by taking the steps, and if we don't take the action as described in our basic textbook, we might not recover. These study and action sessions will guide you through the steps precisely as the first 100 men and women laid them down. These are back to the basic sessions, accepting the simple kit of spiritual tools that's been laid at our feet. And guys, I also I steal some information from the Joe and Charlie Big Book study as well, and I'm going to use some of their stuff tonight on Columbus. Let's open up with the set-aside prayer. God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. Amen. As we're doing introductions, I'm going to pass around the 7th tradition, John Alcoholic.
Hey, John.
Hey, John. Carolyn, alcoholic addict.
Hi, Carolyn.
I'm Will, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Will.
Hi, Will. Steve, I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Steve.
Steve.
Dean, alcoholic.
Hi, Dean.
Jake, alcoholic.
Hi, Jake.
Allie, alcoholic.
Hi, Carolyn.
Patty, alcoholic.
Hi, Patty.
Mark, alcoholic.
Mark.
Brian, alcoholic.
Hey, Brian.
Peter, alcoholic.
Peter.
Tammy, alcoholic.
Hi, Tammy.
Jeff, alcoholic.
Hi, Jeff.
Jamie, alcoholic.
Hi, Jamie.
Kristen, alcoholic.
Hi, Kristen.
Jackie, alcoholic.
Hi, Jackie. All right, guys, thanks for coming. They promised me that again, we're not going to meet next week. So the Tuesday after Memorial Day, which is next week, we will not be meeting. So we're gonna move on to step 3 the Tuesday after that, which I believe is June 7th or thereabouts. I am at the end of the meeting today going to tell you just a little bit about some very rudimentary and simple stuff that I'd like you to get started on as regards your 4th step, simply because I don't want to waste the 2 weeks when we're not meeting. So today, thank you. Got it. Today we're at We Agnostics, okay, which is page 44, and before we get started reading We Agnostics, I just want to talk a little bit about last week. Was more about alcoholism, and hopefully at the end of chapter 3, right, we are convinced that left to my own devices, I'm not going to overcome drinking. Now, they showed us 4 examples that I'm going to need the help of a higher power or a power greater than myself to overcome my disease of alcoholism, right? What a bummer, because when I think back on my past history with a higher power, of course, I was brought up Catholic, and it brings up a lot of bad memories for me. So when we look back at Bill's story, Bill thought self-knowledge would help him. Roland Hazard thought self-knowledge would help him. Fred, the high-bottom drunk, thought self-knowledge would fix it. But none of them were able to be helped by self-knowledge. They didn't get the answer until they found that higher power. So I'm going to reread something on page 43. So if you're there, go back one page and look at the bottom paragraph on page 43. So this is after the 4 examples who tried everything but a higher power and nothing worked till they got that higher power. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. So that was the whole point behind that chapter, is to show us that we are going to need the help of a higher power. So they're telling us that we cannot heal a sick mind with a sick mind. They're telling us that self-knowledge will not do the job. They're telling us that the more we try to think our way out of it, the deeper we get. They're telling us that it must come from a higher power, our defense against that first drink. I know we got some fans going, so if they're bothering you, maybe you can shift around. I'm going to put that baby up. So, with many alcoholics, this gives us one hell of a dilemma, right? Because after chapter 3, I am convinced that I need the help of a higher power. Without that help, I'm going to go back to drinking. Now, many of us do not have a kind and loving God in our past, right? My Catholic priest, when I was a kid, he talked of hellfire, brimstone, damnation, etc., etc. And I found something interesting, if I can find it, and then I got to read it. I was on my way out to the retreat about 6 months ago, and I stopped to get gas, and I found this dollar bill sitting on the handle of the gas pump. And I'm going to read this because I think this exemplifies old ideas about spirituality. The $1 million question. So this was a dollar bill I found sitting on the gas pump, right? Oh, I got $1 million, right? But no. The $1 million question. Will you go to heaven when you die? Here's a quick test. Have you ever told a lie, stolen anything, or used God's name in vain? Jesus said, whomever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Have you looked with lust? Will you be guilty on Judgment Day? If you have done those things, God sees you as a lying, thieving, blasphemous adulterer at heart. The Bible warns that if you are guilty, you will end up in hell. So, that's just the first part of it. And I'm like, my goodness, no wonder people are going to have a tough time making up a decision about God when we have been educated with stuff like that. And, I thought, well, maybe, we're in the modern age. Maybe people don't think that way. But, I happen to work with a guy. I call him a holy roller. And he is absolutely convinced that if I do not believe the way he believes, that I am going to be going to hell. I mean, I've talked with him about it. And I've tried to explain, our ideas about spirituality being different than religion, but he's having none of that. So that dollar bill that I read, I think, are some of the old ideas that hopefully this chapter is going to help us to set aside, right? Because quite frankly, guys, I've been doing the things on this dollar bill. I've been defying God my whole life. So if I come into this program with this kind of belief, I'm going to think to myself, well, my goodness, God is not going to help me. How can I ask Him for help to overcome alcoholism, right? Because, yeah, I mean, have I lied, stolen, cheated, done worse than lust after people? I mean, I've done all of these things, right? And so have most of us when we come in here. Bill thought that sooner or later I'm going to have to ask these people, us alcoholics, to make a decision about God. And he thought that they're not going to be able to make this decision about God based upon old ideas, right? So in this chapter, Bill is going to give us some new information about God. And he's thinking that hopefully we can disregard some old ideas and pick up some new ideas. Let's see here. As I read We Agnostics, I discovered my old ideas, my old prejudices about God, which were much like this dollar bill, were wrong. Right? So if I can discard them and I can pick up some new ideas about God, maybe I can make a decision about God helping me in my life, right? Something I've never asked Him to do. Dr. Jung told Roland that ideas, attitudes, and emotions, which were the guiding forces in the lives of these people, were suddenly cast aside, and new ideas, attitudes, and emotions took their place. Now, the chapter is We Agnostics, right? So you have the roots of two words. You have ag and gnostic. Gnostic means knowledge, and ag means without, right? So that's just without knowledge. Bill said when they talked of a God personal to me, my mind snapped shut, right? He was aghast. And I think a lot of us have that same reaction. So this chapter is put here that I might read, I might question, I might wonder, and I might get some new ideas. It does not tell us how to believe or anything like that. All it's meant to do is to make us question, wonder, and maybe say some of the old ideas that I've grown up with are wrong. So now we are going to go to page 44, right? So at the top of the page, let's write a couple of things. Let's write agnostics are unsure, right? Agnostics are unsure. Atheists don't believe, right? And we're going to run into those two words as we read through the chapter, so you'll be able to see the correct spelling. I probably have them spelled wrong. But agnostics are unsure. Atheists don't believe. And then you can also write a chapter devoted to step 2. This chapter is devoted to step 2. Okay? Agnostics are unsure. Atheists don't believe. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Let's highlight to the end of the paragraph. Okay, go ahead and highlight it. Get that done. And then we're going to put a 1 in front of if, because they're going to ask us 2 simple questions. You know, 2 simple questions whether or not we're alcoholic. So put a 1 in front of if. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or put a 2 in front of the if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only, circle only, a spiritual experience will conquer. Right? So, you know, I think back in the 50s they came up with 10 questions. Then they had 20 questions. Then they had 44. I have no idea how many questions they have on the little pamphlets that they hand out today. One of my favorites is, do you drink alone? Right? Do you drink alone? If I'm buying, yes. If you're buying, no. Right? That's an easy one to answer. You know, but that's not going to tell me if I'm an alcoholic or not. So the first question, what it means, I'm going to translate it to you. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, that means can you quit entirely on your own resources? Right? Have you tried to quit drinking and not come to AA and tried different things but unsuccessfully? So can you quit entirely on your own resources? If you're a real alcoholic, you got to say no to that. The second question is, do you have any control over the amount you take once you start to drink? right? I mean, I'll never forget, I stop off at the bar, I'll be back, I'm just going to go have a couple quick ones. You know, you have those 2 beers, they lead to 6, they lead to 12, and you never make it back home that night. So they're also telling us that we are a unique people. Yet we are among a few people in the world who suffer from a twofold illness that can only be overcome by a spiritual experience. They're also going to tell us that this is a terminal disease, right? But the good news is we can come out of it better shape than when we went into it if we can have the spiritual experience. I mean, that's amazing. We get to come out of this better than when we went into it. So, to one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. Okay? Highlight, to be doomed to an alcoholic death. Okay, you can write step 1 next to that. Then I underline doomed, but highlight, to be doomed to an alcoholic death, step 1. Or to live on a spiritual basis, highlight that, step 2, are not always alternatives to face. Right? And you don't need to write this, but my sponsor, he knew me and he had me write, you're going to have to be willing to be spiritual or you're going to go off by yourself and you're going to die. And of course I already knew that, but he reiterated it to me. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must, circle must, and highlight. Must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Just highlight that little phrase, okay? And off to the left, you know, this is for both you and it's for the sponsees that you're going to be helping out in the future. You can write 2 options. Hope/spirituality, right? Or death. You know, and some of us can go on and be miserable for a good long time, but eventually, you know, most of us will die before our time if we continue to be a practicing alcoholic. So 2 options. Hope, spirituality is the first one. Death is the second. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. So disconcerted means upset, embarrassed, or worried. Don't be worried about it, right? We're going to be okay. Now, let's highlight this next sentence. It's rather important. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago, right? Let's see here. I think I've got some more notes to read. Let's see. So, you know, we stop right here and you got to ask ourselves, you know, what is our belief? And you're gonna kind of talk to your sponsee about this. What is our belief as far as this God thing goes, right? You know, what is our belief? I was taught that there are 3 ways to believe. Okay? The first way is an atheist. An atheist believes there's no God, there's no power greater than human power. We're going to stand on our own 2 feet. We're going to run our own show. There's nothing greater than ourselves in this world, right? So, you know, ask ourselves, am I an atheist? I'm answering no, I'm not an atheist. I definitely believe there's something stronger than me in this world. So the second way to believe is an agnostic, without knowledge, right? That means we've always believed in some kind of God, right? I mean, when I go up to the Boundary Waters, it's like, my God, who created this wonderful thing, right? But the problem with me is I never had that God in my own life, right? When I went to church as a child and even as a teenager, God was somebody that was in somebody else's life, not mine, right? So I've never tried to ask God for any help in my own life, and I have no knowledge of God, helping me, or anybody I know. Now, the third way that I was taught that you can believe is a true believer. And the true believer knows that God exists and has experienced God's power in their life, right? So I don't think most of us don't come into AA as true believer, right? So the question is, how can we become, how can we get some of this belief, and how can we tap into God's power in our own lives, right? So again, remember guys, we hopefully did the God is and the God isn't. And what I'd like you to do is...
Repeat that again. True believer has experienced...
A true believer knows that God exists and has experienced God's power in their life. Right? So they've got direct experience. I never asked God for help. I didn't think He would help me. I'm not counting foxhole prayers, right? I just didn't think that God was going to help me, and I had no experience with that. But I did believe there was something, and I think most people coming into AA are indeed agnostics, right? They think there's something, but certainly nothing that's going to help me, right? So again, if you haven't done it yet, I want you to write down some things that you would like God to be. Because you know what, man, we can start with that. So if you want God to be loving, if you want God to be helpful, if you want God to give you guidance, just write down some things that you would like God to be, and that's what we can start with, right? When I was a little kid, we had this one priest, and I was kind of a little thief and a liar even back then, and he convinced me that I was not that I was probably going to end up in downstairs, right, rather than upstairs. So that sentence I just left, many of us would recovered long ago. That's like Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob went to church. He believed in God, but he had not, I don't think, tried to use God's power in his own life. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power, circle power, wasn't there. Okay, now we're going to highlight this last little sentence. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed us utterly. Right? So that's, I tried to quit drinking with my willpower. I would, take a different job, get a different girlfriend. I would switch from whiskey to beer. I would try all of these things, yoga. Nothing of that nature was able to help me. So we are going to highlight the whole next paragraph. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had, circle had, because that's a must. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had, circle had, to be a power greater than ourselves. Right? Obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? Okay? So, guess what? We're going to highlight the next sentence because it's going to tell us something. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you, and I'm talking about you guys right here, right, to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Now, it doesn't say that we're going to find a power greater than ourselves, which will enable us to solve our problem. We're going to find a power greater than ourselves that will solve the problem for us. And as I discovered as I worked these steps, this higher power was not only able to relieve me of the obsession to drink, use drugs, and gamble, but also it helped me with all of the other problems that I had in my life, because I discovered that alcoholism was just a symptom of many, many different things that were wrong with me, right? So this book, that's what this book is about. It's about finding that power. So right next to that sentence, let's write, must seek higher power, right? We've got to seek that higher power. We can't just expect it to come. Must seek higher power, right? And I remember when my sponsor first had me doing the rudimentary prayers, I thought it was rather silly, but I did it anyway, right? Because I was seeking, and as I kept doing it, my prayer life always got better. And every time I prayed, I changed just a little bit, right? Every single time I prayed. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual. So underline spiritual, and above it write higher power. Higher power. As well as moral. Underline moral, and above that write helping people. Helping people. Okay? And then highlight the next little sentence. And it means, of course, that we were going to talk about God, and underline God. Right? A lot of people say you can't talk about God because the newcomer's not going to like it and they're going to leave. Well, this book is talking about God all over the place, and until I went through this book, I did not stand a chance. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. Next to that paragraph, let's write, can be scary for newcomers, right? And I'm talking about this God thing. Can be scary for newcomers. And a lot of people say, oh, that's it. I'm walking out the door now because there's no way, right? So God can scare people, right? Or the idea can so turn them off that they'll think that this is not for them. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which some people had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought, highlight, that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. I mean, that's exactly what I thought. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance, and askance means with disapproval, at many individuals who claimed to be godly. Okay, highlight the next sentence. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Right? So, going up one sentence up, we looked askance at many individuals who came to be godly. It made me real happy when some of these televangelists, I think Jim Bakker was one, when they fell, right? When all the scandal and everything broke, for some reason that made me happy. I said, see, this stuff doesn't work, right? And I was a big scoffer. Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able, highlight to the end of the paragraph, as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. Right? So when they're talking about lay aside prejudice, they're talking about our old ideas, right? And then they're asking us if we can just have an open mind, right? And they're saying that's all we need is an open mind. That's all we need. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. I'm sorry, highlight that. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect contact with Him. Stop highlighting right there. And remember, when Ebby Thatcher met Bill in his kitchen, and they were arguing back and forth about God, and finally, I think Ebby got tired, and he said, "Bill, why don't you come up with your own idea of God?" Right? That's where Bill came up with the idea that we do not need the religious idea of God. We don't need to let other people tell us what God is or who God is or how to believe in God. We can have our own conception of God, however rudimentary that is, or however simple. And they're telling us right here that's all we need. So even if you said, I think God wants what's good for me, that's enough to get started. That's enough. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, I highlighted those because I like all the different terms Bill uses for God. Underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. Circle simple steps and draw a little arrow to the left and write 3 through 11. 3 through 11. Okay? And then after simple steps, we're going to highlight to the end of the page. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. So right underneath that paragraph, right, this is a promise. That's a promise. It's saying that it's open to everybody. No matter what your ideas are, no matter what happened to you in your past, no matter what, if you earnestly seek, and next to seek, right, on one line up from the bottom, next to seek, write action. Because, seeking is an action, right? It is open, we believe, to all men. When, therefore, we speak to you of God, we mean, again, highlight your own conception of God. What do you think God is, or what would you like God to be? This applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice, circle the word prejudice, you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. Okay, again, double underline the sentence. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth. That's all we need to get things rolling, right? To affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth, but if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. And again, man, you always go back to Ebby Thatcher 12-stepping Bill in his kitchen. That's where this whole idea started. Now, at the top of the page, we're going to write something. We're going to write belief plus experience equals faith. So belief plus experience equals faith. So they're going to tell us that we're not going to jump right into having faith, right? We start with a belief. We see that this thing can work for other people. We're going to do what they ask us to do, and we're going to see if we get results. Belief plus experience equals faith. Okay, so again, let's highlight the next 5 lines. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, okay, that's the atheist, or am I even willing to believe, do I now believe is the agnostic, or am I even willing to believe, that's the atheist, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. So that's the beginning of everything. So we're gonna make a notation off to the right. So make yourself a note, right? Stop here and ask sponsee, and I want you guys to ask yourself too. Stop here and ask sponsee, do you believe or are you willing, ... Stop here and ask sponsee and yourself, right? Do you believe or are you willing, ... Which, willing to believe, right? Ask sponsee, do you believe or are you even willing, ... right? It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure, circle spiritual structure, can be built. Okay, now you see that asterisk again, right? Page 567 right after it. That's the 3rd time they've asked us to go back to page 567. We read it only once, but they want us to go back to 3 times as we're taking our sponsee through this book. We want to make sure if we're going to have a spiritual experience so that we can recover, they want us to be doggone sure we know what a spiritual experience is, right? Now the spiritual structure that Bill's talking about, we're going to see that he's talking about an arch that we're going to walk through to freedom. And this arch is made out of stones, which are the steps. And the foundation is step 1. Step 1 is willingness. He's now told us the cornerstone, which is belief, which is step 2. So if we can say we believe, or we even willing to believe, we now have 2 stones in place on this arch that we are going to build and hopefully walk through to freedom. That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, "I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if only I could believe as he believes, but I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him." So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a much simpler level, right? Mine was the most rudimentary level possible. I mean, I just hit my knees and I said, "God, can you please help me get through the day sober?" Right? I was following the instructions of my sponsor, and then at the end of the day when I made it, I hit my knees again and I said, "God, thank you so much for getting me through this day." Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Okay? Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things make us bristle with antagonism. Okay, so let's highlight that casual reference to spiritual things make us bristle with antagonism, and we're going to write something at the top of the page. We're going to explain this a little bit. Okay, adhering to an opinion despite evidence or in spite of reason. Right? That was me, adhering to an opinion despite evidence or in spite of reason. Right? I mean, I came in and out of these rooms for years and I saw people who were just like me, even some of them who partied with me, and they had recovered.
John, I'm sorry.
Adhering to an opinion despite evidence or in spite of reason. Right? Those are our old ideas. Adhering to an opinion despite evidence or in spite of reason. Right? And that was me. You know, I saw this work for other people, but I said, this God thing ain't going to work for me, right? It is not going to work for me. Because I don't believe it, right? I mean, that's just one example. I found out too, when I as I worked these steps, I found out that many things I believed my whole life were completely wrong. I mean, the way that I live my life. I mean, this opened my mind to so many things. It's unbelievable, right? I found that many of us, we come in here and we're closed-minded individuals. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. They're telling us we got to get rid of it. Thinking I'm always right, you're wrong, I'm not even going to listen, right? Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. Okay, highlight 2 sentences. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. So we're going to write something next to that. Hitting bottom to become willing. Hitting bottom to become willing. Right? My sponsor, man, he said, you do not enable these people. You let them hit their bottom and you let them hit it hard, because that's the only way they're going to become willing to do the work that we need to do to recover. So he was a real advocate of letting people hit bottom and not becoming enablers, because we're hurting them in the long run. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. Right? So those old ideas, they sure kept me in prison a long time. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. Right? When we turn that light switch, we've got faith that the light's going to turn on. Now, everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. Right? They're taking us back to, maybe, what is that, freshman or junior high science class? These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. Okay? Highlight the next 5 lines. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life, as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding creative intelligence, right there our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. So next to what we just highlighted, on the right, let's write, I won't believe. I won't believe. I know that's not true. That's ridiculous. I won't believe. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creations, highlight to the end of the paragraph, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? So, it won't keep you sober, but Alpha and Omega are the first and last letter of the Greek alphabet. First and last letter of the Greek alphabet. Okay, so we're going to highlight the next 2 sentences because they're going to beg us. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice even against organized religion. Okay? We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. Highlight this little sentence. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. Right? I used to sneer at them. I used to call them hypocrites. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes use their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. Again, right, the televangelists, the Jim Baker, and I forget all of them, that were caught having affairs or stealing the money. I pointed to them and I'd say, see this is all nonsense. It does not work. And I would point my fingers at other people rather than look at myself, right? Matter of fact, let's off to the left, let's write, point fingers at others, not look at me, because I think that's true for all of us. Point fingers at others, not look at me, right? Whenever we're condemning other people, we don't, and we're higher and mightier than them, we don't have to look at ourselves, right? We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. Right? I mean, people are people. They're going to have their foibles. They're going to have their failures, and I would point to them and I would condemn this whole idea of God and spirituality and religion. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. Okay, on one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. So, I'm sorry, let's highlight that first sentence there. And right next to it, we're going to write first 100 and authors of the stories. First 100, so the first 100 wrote this book, and the authors of the stories. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Okay, we're going to just go ahead and highlight to the end of the paragraph. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. Okay, as a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Won't keep you sober, but that was Al Smith, governor of New York, 1924. But the main point they're getting across here is the first 100 people who wrote this book and the authors of all these stories, even as they've changed over the years, every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. So that's kind of key. That's kind of key to having this whole thing work for us. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain simple attitude toward that power and to do certain simple things, underline certain simple things, and write 12 steps/actions. 12 steps/actions. And to do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, right, the step one, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly, highlight, met a few simple requirements. Highlight that little phrase, and underneath it write mandatory/the steps. They're saying they're requirements. A requirement is something that must be done, something that needs to be done, that is mandatory, right? They're saying that that they're requirements, and they're talking about the steps. By the way, you can also go up to about line 3 from the bottom and just write promise. That's another promise there, right? They found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed in. You know, I don't know how you guys were in the midst of your addiction at the end, but that sure sounds a lot better than where I was at. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. Okay, so under that line, they show how the change came over them. Draw a line across the whole page, and underneath that line, write how to live with an arrow going down. Because from now on, all I did is I drew a line across the book and I wrote how to live, because now they're going to tell us how to live from here on out. So above it, I wrote no more war stories. They're going to tell us how to live. From here on out, this book is going to tell us how to live, how to find our higher power, what to do. When many hundreds of people are able to say, highlight the next 3 lines, that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith, right? And again, I mean, that's hopefully your sponsor. That's the people that wrote the book, the authors of the stories. That's the guys, the people you see at meetings that have recovered and are now trying to help other people and live their life a new way, right? It's all these people. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. So the intellect is simply the capacity to learn. They were the same as we were. Yet we've got airplanes, toaster ovens, cars, we've got all these things, right, that they didn't have. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. Okay, highlight. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Okay, so, and they're going to use this to help us, because that's us, with this whole God idea. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. So I'm going to tell you, two quick stories here. First story, and it's about belief and faith. Let's say that you move into this area right here, and you don't really know anybody, but your car breaks down, and you go across the street and you knock on the door and you ask your neighbor, "Hey, my car broke down. Do you know a good mechanic?" And the guy says, "Yeah, I know Jim down the street." You go to Jim. He'll treat you right. He'll do a good job and charge you a fair price. So you go to Jim. He fixes your car. He does a good job, treats you right, gives you a fair price. You leave there. A year later, your car breaks down again, right? Now, the first time you went to Jim on belief, the second time you're going to go back on faith, because you know that he's going to do a good job and he's going to treat you right, right? So the first time somebody told you that this would happen, you went on belief. The second time, because you have direct experience, you're going back on faith, right? So you can only start with belief, right? Came to believe, step 2. You only start with belief. It doesn't say, step 2 doesn't say came to know or came to have faith in. It only says came to believe, and you're basing this on what the people in the book are telling you, what your sponsor's telling you, what people at meetings are telling you, right? Now, Columbus. I'm Columbus, and I just love this. I'm stealing this directly from Joe and Charlie, right? Columbus is one of the greatest examples on what you can do with belief when you change your belief. So roughly 500 years ago, most of what is called the civilized world was situated around the Mediterranean and the western shores of Europe. Now, they found a place called the East Indies. And in the East Indies, they had these wonderful spices, these wonderful silk fabrics, this great pottery. They had all this cool stuff that the rich people wanted, right? So goods for the rich and the well-to-do. And they were looking for a new trade route to get to the East Indies. And somebody asked the question, well, can we sail to the East Indies? And they said, no, there's no way you can sail to the East Indies. What you do is you go to the northeast end of the Mediterranean Sea, then you go by horseback, you go there by camel, or you walk. And it takes a couple of years, And then somebody said, well, how about if we sailed there? And they said, no. If you try to sail there, you're going to go off the edge of the world and you're going to die, right? And people probably sailed out and they never came back. Now all of a sudden Columbus comes on the scene, right? Here comes Columbus, right? And Columbus probably had to be an alcoholic, right? Because he's going to believe differently and he's going to express that belief. Now, people who did that back then, many times were hung from a tree. They had their head cut off, right, if they believed differently. So Columbus says, I believe the world is round, right? And then Columbus made one of the most drunk statements ever. He said, I believe we can get east by sailing west, right? Other things that tell us Columbus was an alcoholic. When Columbus left, he did not know where he was going. When Columbus got there, he didn't know where he was. And when Columbus got back, he did not know where he had been. Right? But what really makes Columbus an alcoholic is a woman financed the whole trip. And she did it twice, right? Twice. So this is a formula that the world has always known. This is an age-old formula, and this is the formula that we use to go through that arch to freedom. Okay, the first thing, you've got to be willing to do something. So for Columbus, the need to find a new trade route made him willing. right? For me, I was broke, I was near death, I wanted to kill myself, I couldn't stop using, right? That made me willing, right? B, you've got to believe you can do so, right? So, Columbus, he thought I can get east by sailing west, because he thought that world was round, right? Now, for me, I saw others who were as helpless as me, and they had recovered from this. So that's where and they told me that it would work. That's where I got my belief. Now, when we have the belief, when Columbus had the belief, he's still standing on the shore. Does him no good. So he's got to make a decision, right? So for us, making that decision is step 3. For Columbus, I'm going to go and find out if the world is round and not flat, right? Now this decision, when Columbus made it, he is still standing on the shore. When I take step 3 and I say, made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him, I'm still not doing anything, right? So we've got to do D. And D is to start taking action, right? So for Columbus went to the King of Portugal asking for money. The king said, no way, you're going to sail off the edge of the world and I'm going to lose all my money. Then he went to the Queen of Spain. He said, look, we can do this. We can sail east. The world is round. The Queen gave him money. He bought ships. He bought provisions. He bought men. Right? And then he took off. He left. He took action. So again, his belief and his decision did him no good until he took action. Now, once Columbus started sailing, we don't know this for sure, but a lot of people think that Columbus hired a special sailor. This special sailor had the best eyesight in the world, and he'd put him up there at night with a lantern on the lead ship, and Columbus said, look here, I believe the world is round, but if you see the edge of the world, you holler so we can get turned around so we don't go over it, right? So Columbus sailed straight west for several days, and Columbus got results. He found land, right? Now, he found the West Indies, not the East Indies. He came back, he went back to the Queen, and he said, look here, refinance me because I proved I can do it. This time I'm going to go back, and this time I'm going to get the silks, I'm going to get the spices, I'm going to get the pottery, the fish sauce, the linens, all of those, the wine, all of those things that you want. Now here's the key. The second time that Columbus left sailing west to get east, he did not have that special sailor on the front of the bow, because Columbus went back on faith, not on belief, because he knew that he wasn't going to sail off the edge of the world. He knew that he was going to get past the West Indies and hit the East Indies. So, step 2, guys, you cannot start with faith. Everybody thinks, I got to have faith. I can't have faith. You do not need faith. You can only start with belief. You start with belief. You make the decision, right? That's step 3. You take action, which is steps 4 through 11. And then I'm telling you, you are going to get the results, right? The obsession is going to be lifted from you to drink. Once you get the results, you're going to have faith, right? So the first thing we need to recover from alcoholism is we've got to be willing to change. We've got to be willing. That's why we walk into these rooms. The second thing, we got to believe we can do it. The third thing, we got to make the decision to find out. The fourth thing is we take the action, which is steps 4 through 11. So again, step 3, guys. Step 3 does us no good until we do 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Step 12 says we had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Step 2 doesn't say came to know. It doesn't say came to have faith in. It only says came to believe. Right? Now, me personally, I no longer believe that God's going to save my life, right? Get me back to sanity. I know He's going to do it because He did it. You should have seen me when I walked in here, man. He has totally turned my life around and granted me sanity and freedom from the obsession to use alcohol, drugs, and gamble. So we've got the faith. We go to the newcomer. We get the newcomer to believe that they can do it too. Then we get the newcomer to make the decision, and the decision can be as simple as I make a decision to do what you did. Then we take them by the hand. We walk them through the action steps, 4 through 11. They do the work. They get the results. They have the spiritual awakening, the spiritual experience, the personality transformation. Then they go to the newcomer. I've seen this. I've only been sober not even 5 years. I've got people that I've sponsored that are now taking other people through this. I mean, it just multiplies. It's an amazing thing to watch. The one thing that we cannot do, we cannot make the newcomer willing. We cannot do that. I mean, I wish I could inject, 500 cc's of willingness into everybody's ass, but I cannot do that. That's a job they got to do for themselves. And the only way people are going to get willing, right, is they're going to have to do what I did. They're going to have to go out there. They're going to have to drink a hell of a lot of whiskey. Maybe they're going to do a lot of cocaine. Maybe they're going to end up in jail. Maybe they're going to lose their job, divorce, and be completely hopeless. That's what it took for me. That's how they get their willingness, right? So people that say, I've been working step 1 in AA for the last couple of years and it's not doing me any good, that isn't true, man. We practice step 1 out there, man. We do it out there. We don't do it in here. And as far as if anybody tells you that you got to have more time before you sponsor people, do not listen to them. Ebby Thatcher went to Bill with 2 months sober. Bill went to Dr. Bob with 6 months. Dr. Bob went to Bill Dotson with a matter of days. So you go to people and you start helping them as soon as you feel any kind of change in yourself and as soon as you think you've got anything to offer. And I don't care if that's 3 days sober. Me, again, man, I was sober 6 months. I was ready to drink or put a bullet in my head and going to a meeting every night because I wasn't working these steps. And when I went through Code Blue, they assigned me a kid who was 25 years younger than me, 25 years, sober for maybe about the same time as me, but he was an older member because he had done the work and had the experience, and I had not, right? So, let's go back. Where did I leave off here? Columbus. Okay. Some of us, Columbus around earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. We asked ourselves this, are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? So just an analogy to ourselves. Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Right? I think you can write 12/8/1903, I believe, was when the Wright brothers flew. 12/8 of 1903, they proved everybody wrong, man, and they flew because they believed they could do it. They made a decision they were going to do it, and they took action to do it, same as Columbus. Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was an almost old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Highlight that sentence. I mean, man, you look at the way things change from generation to generation. It's simply amazing. We look at things differently. Look at things differently. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, I bet they do it. Maybe not so long either. Is this amazing? Let's write July 20th, 1969. Landed on the moon. So that's 30 years after Bill wrote this book, or after the book was published. 30 years after it was published, we landed on the moon. I bet they do it. Maybe not so long either. So let's highlight to the end of the paragraph. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does? That's even more true today. It's unbelievably true. Some people got to get a new phone every 3 months, right? So this next paragraph is rather important. We're going to read this. It's a little flashback. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. So we're going to highlight that whole paragraph, and then next to it we're going to write anti-promises. So go ahead and highlight the whole paragraph now. And off to the left, write anti-promises. So these are the opposite of some promises we're going to get after we do the 5th step and the 9th step. Though this book is laced with promises. We get promises all over this book. Not only the ones that are read at meeting, they're all over this book. So we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply our human problem, same readiness to change our point of view. Okay, put a 1 in front of we. We are going to list the bedevilments. That's the first one. We were having trouble with personal relationships. I know I was. Put a 2 in front of we. We couldn't control our emotional natures. I mean, the first 6 months I was sober, not working these steps, I couldn't control my anger. I thought I was going to get fired. Put a 3 in front of we. We were a prey to misery and depression. Put a 4 in front of the next we. We couldn't make a living. Put a 5 in front of the next we. We had a feeling of uselessness. Put a 6 in front of we. We were full of fear. Put a 7. We were unhappy. Put an 8. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. Okay? So right next to what we wrote, you wrote anti-promises. Now write another note. Ask sponsee, does he feel like this? He or she. Ask sponsee, do you feel like this? Are any of these things, can you relate to any of this? Ask sponsee, does he or she feel like this? And I had all of those bedevilments. The only one I was hanging on to was making a living, but at the end, even that baby was gone, right? Highlight the next 4 lines. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. So after God idea did, write solution. Solution. That's the solution everybody talks about when you hear them get up and tell their story at the speaker meetings. Now, off to the left, let's write ourselves a note too. Spirit of hope message at meetings. That's what we want to give out. Spirit of hope message at meetings. That's our job, right? Once we get better, we don't want to go in there, oh yeah, when I drank and I did that. We want to give a spirit of hope message at meetings. Because somebody comes in, man, all these bedevilments, and they're feeling pretty doggone bad. I want them to walk out of that meeting saying, my God, that fella, he told me it could happen to me too. I want people to walk out of meetings feeling that they can get what we've got. And that's giving them a spirit of hope. The Wright brothers' almost childish face that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. Right? So, childlike, we can do this. Let's highlight the next sentence. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. Right? Again, I'm going to use my willpower. I'm going to work more hours. I'm going to do yoga. I'm going to use my willpower because I can do anything, right? So at the bottom of the page, my sponsor had me write, my way of doing things kept me stuck. Now, if that's true for you, write it down. If it's not, you don't have to. But my way of doing things kept me stuck, and that was sticking to my old beliefs. That was not having an open mind, thinking I'm always right, scoffing and saying things won't work before I try them. I mean, that's how I live my life, right? My way of doing things kept me stuck. When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who had insisted the Wright brothers would never fly. So at the top of the page, again, we're going to write something. Get away from this chair here. Right, and again, this is my sponsor. He really believes this. People need to go through the insanity of over and over and over. Right? And I mean, I've sponsored people, and you lend them some money, you go and get them, you help them get out of scrapes, you do all this. People need to go through the insanity of over and over and over. People need to go through the insanity of over and over and over, right? I kept thinking this time it's going to be different. This time something else is going to happen, and it happened to me over and over and over and over. Same result whenever I drank or did things my way. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it is more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said we don't know. Highlight we don't know, and after it write agnostic. Agnostic. And I think most of us that come in here are agnostics. When we became, we're going to highlight the next paragraph. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else He is nothing. God either is or He isn't. What was our choice to be? Okay, so we got that highlighted. We're going to write something next to it. No halfways. Ask sponsee, what is your choice? What is your choice? Now, we're not taking step 3 right now. We're not doing that. We're just, are you even willing to believe, right? No halfways. Ask sponsee, what is your choice? Are you even willing to believe that there's something, right? Ask sponsee, what is your choice? Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason, underline that. Bridge of reason, right? Capitalized, right? A deity. Toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land, underline that. The new land, that's another deity for Bill, it's capitalized. Had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Underline, friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. Next to that, write meetings. When you see a newcomer, we got to greet them. We've got to greet newcomers. So just write meetings next to that. You know, and I'll never forget, man, I went to this meeting and I was really hurting, man. It was at the New Hope Alano, and after the meeting, like 15 people came up, and there was 40 people at the meeting. 15 people came up and shook my hand, and I'm sitting there thinking, how do these guys know that I'm fresh fish? What's going on here? Well, they know that I'm fresh because they go to that meeting every week, and they didn't recognize me. That's how they knew. I didn't understand that. It's like, why are they coming up to me? And that's what we do with the newcomer. We make them feel welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. So we see that both reasons are capitalized. So I wrote reason is God-given, right? We've got that. Reason is God-given. That was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a kind of faith, hold tight here. We're going to right next to those sentences, right? Conduct yourself as if God is real. I don't care if you believe or not. We're going to try and experiment. When you write some things you'd like to be, conduct self as if God is real. Let's road test this. Even if you don't believe. You know, what would you like God to be? You know, some orderly direction, some love, not getting drunk every night, whatever it is, and then conduct yourself as if God is real. Let's try an experiment. Oops. For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, abjectly faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. We found too that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental gooseflesh that used to bring on. Highlight the next two lines. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? Right? So, right next to that whole paragraph, we're going to write materialistic. Right? I worship money, property, prestige, sex, drugs, anything, right? Anything that would make me feel better temporarily. And then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith, or love, or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith and little else. Right? So next to that, let's write faith in God rather than materials. Faith in God rather than materials. You know, and with this comes the love, right? And the people, our family. Imagine life without faith. Were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life, of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons, created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves had more intelligence than that, at least so the chemist said. Hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable. Though it emanate from our best minds, what about people who proved that man could never fly? There were the people that they proved that we couldn't fly. Certainly proved we couldn't go to the moon. Yet we had been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but liked to tell ourselves it wasn't true. So let's highlight the next 3 lines here. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. So right above that, let's write instructions on where to find God. Instructions right above those 3 lines. You got a little space there. Instructions on where to find God. And let's also write what's keeping me alive. Instructions on where to find God. What's keeping me alive. Now, at the top, I guess at the top of the page, wherever you have room, we're going to write some things. We're going to write the little voice, the conscience, innate knowledge, common sense, the soul. All of those things are inside of us. The little voice, the conscience, innate knowledge, common sense, the soul. I bet a lot of you people, you know, you're out there, you've been sober for a month, and you know, it's like, God, you know what? I'm going to go out to that bar, I'm going to have a few, I'm going to dance. And there's that little voice deep down said, you know, that doesn't sound like too good of an idea, because I know what happened the last time, but we didn't listen to that little voice and did it anyway. So the little voice, the conscience, innate knowledge, common sense, the soul, they're telling us that we're going to find God deep down in every man, woman, and child. Right? I mean, if that's the case, we've all got our own personal God that we can tap into. Right? Little voice, conscious, innate knowledge, common sense, the soul. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or another it is there. For a faith in a power greater than ourselves, the miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are fact as old as man himself. You know, there are studies where they put these little toddlers, or, you know, I don't know exactly how old they were, but they put these little kids together, you know, and they found out that these little kids, when given a choice, would actually give the other little kid more than they took for themselves. Right? Now you get a little bit older, you know, 4 or 5 years older, and all of a sudden these same kids are now taking a little more for themselves and giving a little less. But when they get that kids out there, these studies are showing that they're going to give more to the other person. It's simply amazing. Right? That's inside of us. So let's write, off to the right, let's write, be an asset to society or a liability. Be an asset to society or a liability? I sure like trying to be an asset a lot better than the big old liability that I was. Be an asset to society or a liability. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but here he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. Highlight to the end of the paragraph. We found the great reality, notice that that's capitalized, deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. So next to those three little lines, let's write, prayer and meditation find him or her. I don't know who God is, but I got him down. Prayer and meditation find him or find her or find God, whatever. Prayer and meditation find him. We can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself. Then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway, underline broad highway, capitalized again, another word for a deity. And then let's highlight the last three lines. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Okay? So next to that, let's write seeking equals promises. So seeking equals promises. And I'm talking about those promises that they read at all the meetings. Right? The seeking equals promises. In this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. Circle the word atheist and then draw a little line down to the bottom of the page and write Fitzmayo. Fitzmayo, Fitzmayo. Our Southern Friend. He wrote Our Southern Friend. And you can write 5th AA. I believe number 5. That's and started Detroit. So a little bit of knowledge about him. So Fitzmayo, the 5th AA member, started Detroit, AA in Detroit. Our Southern Friend is the story he wrote. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. So he had the spiritual experience. Again, most of us are going to get the slow, laborious wake-up. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble, frustration. Business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide, these calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. Next to that, do the little bracket and write bedevilments. These are his little mini bedevilments that we read about just a couple pages back. Bedevilments. One night when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic, underline, who had known a spiritual experience. Underline just that little thing, who had known a spiritual experience. Next to it, write, had done the steps. Had done the steps. I'm speeding up because I got like just 3 minutes. I'm going to give you some instructions at the end of the meeting. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, if there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me. But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question. Is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Gotta highlight the italics. Who are you to say there is no God? Right? Who am I? This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. Underline presence of God, capitalized. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence, highlight to the end of the paragraph, he stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. So after that, right, he found faith. Now, again, guys, that's the spiritual experience. Happened to Bill, happened to Fitzmayo. Not going to happen to most of us. Most of us were going to have the awakening, the educational variety. Thus was our friend's cornerstone, underlined cornerstone, fixed in place. No later vicissitude. Vicissitude means loss of interest. No later vicissitude has shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away. The obsession was removed. That very night, years ago, it disappeared. Okay, so highlight this next sentence. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned. Of course, we're gonna have those few moments of temptation. That's gonna get us. And at such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. Highlight: God had restored his sanity. Okay, so let's write. Mental obsession, right off to the right of that top paragraph. Mental obsession, someday I can drink, is gone. That's sanity. Mental obsession, someday I can drink, is gone. That's sanity. Now, I'm not saying save for a few free moments of temptation. I'm not saying that the thought isn't going to cross our minds. It's going to happen. You're going to have using dreams. Using dreams are fine. You know, you wake up, you say, thank God, right? So mental obsession, someday I can drink, is gone. That's sanity. Remember, Bill thought about going into that bar here, the tingling of glasses, the soft music, the thick smoke, the gay chatter, and he thinks, I'm going to go in there. And all of a sudden it hit him, if I go in there, I'm done, right? What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing. Okay? Willing to believe, that's step 2. Circumstances made him willing to believe is step 2. Circumstances making him willing is step 1. So circumstances, step 1. Willing to believe, step 2. He humbly offered himself to his Maker, step 3. Step 3. Then he knew. Highlight the next paragraph. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly. But he has come to all who have honestly sought him. Circle the word sought and write action. Action. Okay, we're going to write a few things. We're going to say the third step prayer will be done. But sought, write action next to that. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. So God could and would if he were sought. Just write that down. God could and would if he were sought. We read that in the ABC. Okay? And then let's write, don't deprive people of their bottom. Then get right with God. Don't deprive people of their bottom. Then get right with God. Must seek. Seeking is an action. Must seek. Seeking is an action. Don't deprive people of their bottom. Then get right with God. Must seek. Seeking is an action. Then let's write, mean what you say what you mean, and don't be mean. Those are good words. Mean what you say what you mean, and don't be mean. Okay, so just a couple of instructions I'm going to give you. Okay, so let's write, we're going to go 1, 2, 3. Reread page 567. Reread 567. Again, do the God is thing if you haven't done it.
Sorry, what page?
567, the spiritual experience. Do the God is, right? Write what you would like God to be. Just write a few things, doesn't have to be long. A couple of things you'd like God to be. And then write down how you relate to the anti-promises. Remember those 8 things we listed. Just go back to those and you don't even have to write it down, but just think of each one how you relate to them. And these are also things you're going to give to your sponsee. So I want you to have your sponsee do that too. So write some things you'd like God to be. Reread page 567. Write down how you relate to the bedevilments several pages back. And then real quick, guys. 567 is, the bedevilments are on page 52. Those are just the anti-promises that we just did. And then real quick, Everybody, I want to grab one of these sheets on the way out and grab at least 2 of these. Make several copies of these, right? So we're jumping ahead, but we're not meeting next week, so I want you to get started on your 4-step. All I want you guys to do, read how the example did it, and I only want you to fill out the first 2 columns. So I want you to fill out people that you are mildly upset with or that you hate with a passion. So I am resentful at. It's going to be your husband, wife, girlfriend, boss, the cops. It's going to be, and I want you to go back through your whole life. People that you have some anger with, and just get started on it. You don't have to do the whole thing, but get started on that list. And don't look at any of these don't look at column 3. So just who are you angry with? And then if you have time, you can write down some of the causes, but just get started on that. I can read again, yep. Which things?
Everything. God's living, critical to your side.
Don't deprive people of their bottom, then get right with God. Must seek Him. Seeking is an action. Seeking is an action, yep. And you can look at my book here. But I think, guys, so again, on this 4-step stuff, just get started on it. I mean, when I first did this, I said, I'm not angry at anybody. Then they said, well, how about your boss, right? How about that girlfriend that cheated on you? Oh, yeah, I'm angry at them. Oh, how about the IRS? Oh, yeah, I don't like them. How about you? And then there's just was a ton of them. So just get started. Don't even look at column 3. Let's end with the 3rd-step prayer. Page 63. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Peace. Everybody have a wonderful Memorial Day. We will see you 2 weeks from tonight.
Okay, I think that's it.
Oh, here, I got it.